When it comes down to it, Pauper is a format that can, even at a common level, take advantage of some of the most powerful mechanics that Magic has to offer. I'm talking about mechanics like the Initiative, Monarch, and with Lord of the Rings coming out as the most recent set, we got a recent spoiler that I think finally gives us the latest mechanic, the newest mechanic that might change the Pauper format for better or for worse, and that's what we're here to discuss. Whether or not the power of the ring tempting you is something that you should look out for in your next deck build. I wanted to talk about specifically framing the conversation around Uruk-hai Berserker. Black and 2 for a 3-mana 3/2 Orc Berserker. When Uruk-hai Berserker enters the battlefield, the ring tempts you. The latest mechanic and the marquee mechanic coming out of the Lord of the Rings set, will it change Pauper? And the way I want to frame this discussion is firstly going into and talking about the similar mechanics that already exist in Pauper, why they're so strong, and how we can apply some of that reasoning to the ring and see if it can work, see if it can be powerful, and come to a conclusion at the end of the day. So first, I want to talk about the tried and true mechanic of Pauper, the Monarch, a ability that provides really free value, because at the end of the day, Pauper is a very board-based format. You're always going to be attacking, you're always going to be blocking. Even with combos that exist out there, there is combat math to be had. And when it comes to that, free cards at your end step are always amazing. Drawing cards is really one of the biggest tenets of Magic, of course. Palace Sentinels being one of the marquee cards that have done this throughout Pauper's history. In the Boros Monarch deck, sometimes in mono white builds, the card blocks well, gives you free value. What more could you ask for? And especially when it comes to something like mono blue fairies, when you're attacking in the air, getting past some big blockers on the ground, you're then able to draw cards at end step, hopefully with free mana up, and then draw cards like Spell Stutter Sprite to gain that free value. So it's a card that's free value and always replaces itself. The card that gives you the Monarch replaces itself and you get cards. But obviously there's the back and forth, because only one player can be the Monarch, and that's the key. With the Monarch, only one player can have it. You're always going to have that back and forth to think about if you can block your opponent's attacker, if they're going to take it from you, whatever it might be. Now with the next mechanic, I'm going to talk about the Initiative. Now this is something a bit more recent, where it's a kind of alternative version of venturing into the dungeon, which we'll get into. The Initiative allows you to go into one specific dungeon, the Undercity, where, you know, the board gamification of Magic the Gathering aside, this is a type of engine that provides a lot of value. You can draw cards, you can goad, you can ramp a little, and you can tutor. You can kind of get cards out of your deck, make them even more powerful. There's a lot of things happening here. And even with the trap mechanic, getting your opponent to lose 5 life, a lot of this is very important in terms of creating clocks for you. And this Initiative happens repeatedly. So when you take the Initiative and at the beginning of your upkeep, you're going to go through these modes. So it's continuous value. You do not need to reactivate it. For example, if you don't want to, you'll get it continuously. But again, even with cards like Avenging Hunter giving you that ability in something like Ponza, only one player can be going through and have the Initiative at a time. You both can't do it. You have to gain the Initiative back to venture further through the Undercity. But again, the value is amazing because you do have draw cards, you get your opponent to lose life. It replaces itself in terms of the value. I mean, let's be real. The Initiative is insane, especially when it comes to cards like Vicious Battle Rage, or cards that are banned in the Pauper format for helping to create the Turbo Initiative deck that existed in Pauper. Just casting cards like Dark Ritual and Simian Spirit Guide, throwing Initiative cards onto the battlefield immediately and gaining that free value. The Initiative is so powerful that the Pauper format needed to create a deck around it just to get it on turn 1. So if that tells you anything, the archetype is powerful. Now, finally, the last one is what I mentioned, venturing into the dungeon. This is a little less explored in Pauper because the modes and the 3 different dungeons are a little less kind of clear and less powerful, and really exists in one deck primarily. Obviously in Legacy, we're going to see a mechanic like this work in combo decks, and similarly in Pauper, we have something like Secret Door providing us with the ability to venture into the dungeon at sorcery speed, but again, without tapping anything. So if we manage to get infinite mana through a deck like Pauper Walls, then we're going to be able to take advantage of that and use that as a win condition. Because if we kind of venture back into the Lost Mine of Phandelver, you're going to notice one of the modes is Dark Pool. Each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So again, you keep venturing through, you use that over and over again. You might draw more cards, create more treasure tokens, whatever it might be. You have options when you have infinite mana. Now, ultimately, those are the three pieces that we have. Venturing back, we have some key points that we want to take advantage of. So the previous mechanics, only one player can be, for example, going through the dungeon at a time, or going or having the mechanic at the same time. And you get that continuous value from it. So if you're going through it, you're going to be able to continuously go through the dungeon. Or initiative, you get that trigger on upkeep every time. Monarch is free. You don't need a trigger. You just get it at your end step. So those are some of the things to think about when it comes to Uruk-hai Berserker entering the battlefield and tempting you with the ring. Let's look at what those abilities are. What happens when the ring tempts you? More specifically, with the ring, you have 4 distinct abilities, and these with Uruk-hai you're going to get on ETB. So flickering is going to come into play. So when the ring tempts you, you're going to place an emblem on the other side of the battlefield. And in Pauper and in Magic at large, we don't have any mechanics so far that interact with emblems. This is a mechanic that comes out of the commander format largely, and each time you put a counter, each time the ring tempts you, you gain a new ability, right? And then you put that ability on a creature. Now, the ring bearer, the emblem, will consecutively gain each ability. So for example, the first ability is your ring bearer is legendary, can't be blocked by creatures with a greater power. Then the next one is whenever a ring bearer attacks, you draw a card and discard a card. Now, the second ability doesn't replace the first ability. You gain both. And then if the ring tanks you again, you gain the third ability, and then the fourth ability, and that's it. You don't keep cycling through. The ring emblem gains all 4 abilities if you're tempted 4 times, right? And then it gets placed on a singular creature. Now, flavor aside, the big thing that you have to remember is that both players can have a ring bearer. Even though there's only one ring and one ring to rule them all, this is actually a helpful mechanic, in my opinion. It's a flavor fail where both players can have ring bearers, but it now means that if you gain this ability, you don't have to fight with your opponent back and forth. You can stop them from maybe playing cards that tempt them, but then the power is in your control. If they can't tempt, you have your abilities, you don't lose them. The only way you lose them is if you lose your ring bearer, but you don't lose the emblem. So every time the ring tempts you, you can just replace it on another creature. These are some key pieces here. If we go into some of the rules here, I kind of explained it there. Each time the ring tempts you, you have to choose a creature you control. You can't not put it on a creature, and each player can only have 1 emblem. So if the ring tempts you past the 4th one, it's not like you create a second emblem where the ring starts tempting you again. You can only really gain value from the ring tempting you 4 times. After that, the ring tempting you further just allows you to change your ring bearer. That's all it is. You just get to change the creature that it's on, but it's still going to have the same 4 abilities. It's not going to draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards. It's not going to gain those abilities twice. But again, I think this is a positive. If we go through it at a second glance, I think Sacred Cat would probably be one of the key cards to actually gain an ability like this. When you think of the Cawgates decks or cards that have recursion, if you lose your ring bearer, you can always bring it back with something like Embalm and Sacred Cat, and the power is really low. So if we go back in one of the first abilities, the ring bearer is legendary and can't be blocked by creatures with greater power. Now the Pauper format is full of 1/1s, of course, but it's also full of 2/2s, 3/3s, and especially 4/4s and 5/5s. So not being blocked is actually great, especially when it comes to that last ability, where when the ring bearer deals combat damage to a player, each player loses 3 life. That's pretty damn important. You're going to get pretty aggressive with it. So I think something like Sacred Cat, Cawgates, low to the ground decks, even flyers, mono blue fairies is going to be really important with a mechanic like this. But speaking of white cards in the Pauper format, especially with Uruk-hai Berserker giving us this ability on ETB, we want to look at a card like Ephemerate, giving us that continuous value of the different modes. We could Ephemerate a bunch of times, tempt the ring a bunch of times, and really just aggro our way through those different modes. Give our creatures these abilities immediately. Although they may not have that immediate value, where if we just head back here, can't be blocked, draws a card, discards a card. When it becomes blocked, so if it has like if you put it on Sacred Cat, it gets blocked by a 1/1, that 1/1 will, die. Its control has to sacrifice it at end step, which means it gets around hexproof, gets around indestructible, gets around any other real protection mechanic, do the sacrifice. So that's big too. And then dealing combat damage, ephemerating through all those, that way those creatures have those abilities immediately on attack. So Uruk-hai enters the battlefield, has Summoning Sickness, you ephemerate a bunch. By the time you get to your next draw step, you're going to have at least 3 abilities on this, if not all 4, through other means. So that's going to be able to hypercharge some of your creatures. Now, especially with Ephemerate, if we look at these abilities going through, remember everything I mentioned. You gain all 4 abilities. You can gain them one at a time, but you don't gain that second emblem, and you don't have to fight with your opponent on control. You will always have this emblem. Your opponent may have this emblem as well, but you don't lose this emblem if their ring gets tempted, if they get tempted. You don't lose this ability if they attack you. You always have the ring emblem with the amount of counters you have on it, and every time you get tempted, you just put it on a new creature. And I think that's where Uruk-hai Berserker is really powerful. And ultimately, with all this in mind, I'll let you know, do I think that this card is going to change the Pauper format? Do I think this is good for the Pauper format? And do I think this is powerful? Ultimately, I think so. I think this is going to be really powerful for the Pauper format. And I think this is going to be one of the marquee mechanics that exist in Pauper. Now, obviously, this is just with a black creature that enters the battlefield. So the color pie aspect limits it, because if you think of Pauper, it's very white dominant, very red dominant, very blue dominant. So if we manage to get a creature that gets spoiled, that is white, blue, or red, well, the Pauper Ephemerate deck, the Jeskai Ephemerate deck, is going to have a field day, having Monarch and the ring tempting you to draw cards, deal aggressive damage, or even just the red decks having that ability to draw through their deck, having unblockable creatures. Things like this are going to be really powerful for the Pauper format, and it's just going to be stuck on your creatures. Imagine having the initiative, the Monarch, the ring tempted you. Honestly, the power level in Pauper is going to have to be reevaluated when it comes to certain decks, but I think it's really important to introduce mechanics like this to give players the option. It provides cool new deck building options, cool new pieces of value, and provides some really fun things that you can do when it comes to a format full of commons. Now, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Do you think the ring tempting you will change anything in Pauper? Do you like some of the points I have? Have I missed any aspects that maybe make the ring tempting you worse, more powerful, whatever it might be? Let me know in the comment section down below. Ultimately, I believe this will change the Pauper format in a big way, and it's definitely going to be one of the big contenders in terms of power level, in terms of mechanics to take advantage of in the Pauper format.